What led to the demise of Laurel Canyon's freewheeling society of sex and rock and roll? What if the greatest music scene in America bloomed in a quiet canyon above Los Angeles, then slowly unraveled into paranoia and heartbreak? This is the story of Laurel Canyon, where legends were born, love was tangled, and the dream of a free-spirited paradise came crashing down. How did it all go so right, and then so wrong? Let's find out. Laurel Canyon's golden beginning. Back in the 1960s, something magical started happening out west. A wave of musicians, dreamers, and misfits began drifting toward Los Angeles, not for fame or fortune just yet, but for freedom. And nestled in the hills above Hollywood, they found a hidden gem, Laurel Canyon. This wasn't Beverly Hills glitz or Malibu ocean views. No, Laurel Canyon had a different charm. Winding roads, overgrown trees, wooden homes clinging to the hillsides. It felt more like a country escape than a neighborhood just minutes from the chaos of Sunset Boulevard. One early resident said it best. It was serene, beautiful, like living in the country even though the city was just down the hill. That blend of peaceful seclusion and urban convenience, it was irresistible, and at the time rents were cheap, dirt cheap. The kind of place where young artists could actually afford to live while they figured things out. It wasn't about flashy cars or designer clothes. It was about finding your voice, your tribe, and maybe, if you were lucky, your sound. By the mid-60s, the music started to blossom. A major turning point came in 1965 when the Byrds released Mr. Tambourine Man. That single didn't just launch a band, it marked the start of a movement. The song's jangly guitar and dreamy harmonies felt like Laurel Canyon in audio form. It wasn't some master plan. It was a beautiful accident. Roger McGuinn of the Byrds found a rental near the country store, the canyon's unofficial town square where you could grab a coffee and run into half the local music scene. Not long after, David Crosby moved in too. And just like that, a scene started to form. But even before the rockers showed up, Laurel Canyon had long attracted an oddball crowd. Back in the 1940s and 50s, the area was already a haven for artists, writers, and actors, people who didn't quite fit the Hollywood mold but needed to be close to it. They were the original bohemians paving the way for what was to come. So why did Laurel Canyon become the epicenter of the counterculture? It wasn't the glitz, it was the grit. People came not for the status, but for the spirit. You could rent a quirky old house for next to nothing, jam with your neighbors, and still catch a show on the strip without leaving the neighborhood. Take the Turtles, for example. With their sunny hit Happy Together, they were one of the many groups who found a creative spark in the canyon. The air seemed different there. Thick with ideas, with possibilities, with melodies waiting to be born. And it wasn't just about music, it was about community. You weren't just another tenant. You were part of something bigger. Artists helped each other, inspired each other, sometimes even lived together. And without meaning to, they created a kind of artistic sanctuary, a place where rock and roll could grow wild and free. Behind the harmonies, love, loss, and betrayal. Now let's step inside one of the most iconic homes in Laurel Canyon, perched high on Lookout Mountain. This wasn't just any house, it was the creative nest of the Mamas and the Papas, the group that gave us California Dreamin'. A song that didn't just define a moment, it defined an entire mood. When that track hit the airwaves in 1966, it was more than music. It was a warm breeze of freedom, longing, and golden California sunshine. The harmonies were pure, the message simple. It felt like Laurel Canyon itself, dreamy, open, and full of possibility. But behind the sweet melodies, things weren't nearly so harmonious. Inside that charming hillside home, the band was imploding. While they were captivating audiences on stage, offstage was a tangle of heartbreak and betrayal. Michelle Phillips, married to bandleader John Phillips, fell into a passionate affair with fellow bandmate Denny Doherty. It was more than a romantic misstep. It was a landmine. Not only did it fracture Michelle and John's marriage, it crushed Mama Cass Elliot, who quietly carried a deep affection for Denny. In a tight-knit band built on emotional intimacy, the fallout was devastating. John and Denny stormed out of their Laurel Canyon home, both reeling. Michelle stayed behind, the house now haunted by memories of what once was a musical sanctuary. Still, the show went on. They kept performing, even with hearts breaking behind the scenes. Can you imagine it? Singing songs of love and harmony while standing next to the very people who wounded you. The tension was thick, but somehow the music survived. And then, a twist no one expected. Michelle and John reconciled. Whether it was love, artistic reliance, or just unfinished business, they reunited. The mamas and the papas forged ahead, but the unity that once defined them was never quite the same. From folk sunshine to dark psychedelia. So far, we've walked the sun-drenched trails of Laurel Canyon with the mamas and the papas, but their story is just one thread in a much larger tapestry. The canyon's legacy wasn't built on any single group. It was the collective hum of countless artists, crisscrossing through each other's lives, homes, and hearts. One band that truly captured the canyon's darker edge was Love. Led by the charismatic and mysterious Arthur Lee and fueled by the gritty guitar work of Johnny Eccles, Love didn't follow trends. They made them. Their music wasn't just psychedelic rock. It was a swirling blend of blues, folk, acid, and a dash of haunting mysticism. It felt like the sound of the hills themselves. Beautiful, eerie, unpredictable. Here's where the story takes a twist. Before Love, several of its members played in an early version of the Grassroots. Not the polished hit machine most people know, but a raw, evolving act. That connection might seem small, but it speaks volumes about Laurel Canyon's tangled web. Musicians drifted between bands, borrowed each other's guitars, shared homes, sometimes even lovers. It wasn't a scene, it was a shared ecosystem. But not all connections were harmless. One person tied to that early Grassroots lineup would later be involved in one of the most chilling chapters of American history. While not often named in music circles, his crimes would send ripples through the canyon and beyond. It was a brutal reminder that even in paradise, darkness could take root. Meanwhile, the music itself was changing. Gone were the wide-eyed, harmony-drenched anthems. As the decade wore on, so did the innocence. Artists began looking inward. This was the dawn of the singer-songwriter era. Think of Joni Mitchell, James Taylor, Jackson Browne. They weren't just writing songs, they were documenting their lives in melody. The canyon was the perfect place for it. Mornings spent writing alone, afternoons with neighbors, evenings lost in wine and words. The music turned quieter, more personal. The revolution was no longer in the streets, it was in the soul. And Laurel Canyon, with its wild trees and open doors, became the perfect place to whisper those truths into the world. Which Laurel Canyon artist or band do you think best captured the spirit of the era, and why? Jim Morrison's Laurel Canyon years. Let's now turn the spotlight to one of the most magnetic and mysterious figures to ever call Laurel Canyon home, Jim Morrison, the iconic frontman of the Doors. In the late 1960s, Morrison lived just steps away from the country store, Laurel Canyon's unofficial heart and soul. More than a convenience stop, it was a place where artists and musicians collided, swapping stories over coffee or sharing impromptu jam sessions on the stoop. Morrison could often be seen riding his bicycle around the winding roads, a rock star cloaked in the canyon's laid-back anonymity. Here, in this hillside refuge, he could disappear into the background and maybe even into himself. At the center of Morrison's Laurel Canyon story was Pamela Corson. She was his muse, his lover, and, in his own words, his cosmic mate. But their relationship was anything but serene. They lived in emotional extremes. Deep affection one moment, explosive conflict the next. Fueled by alcohol, mood swings, and creative tension, their love burned bright and burned fast. Meanwhile, Morrison's star was rising. The Doors became the house band at Whiskey A Go Go, just down on Sunset Strip. Their hypnotic, boundary-pushing sound quickly caught the attention of Elektra Records, and in 1967 they released their groundbreaking debut album. Songs like Break On Through and Light My Fire became instant classics, cementing Morrison as a new kind of rock poet. But some of their most haunting work was born right there in the canyon. People Are Strange, with its aching alienation, was reportedly written as Morrison gazed out over LA from a canyon ridge. And Love Street? That was Laurel Canyon in song form, inspired by Pamela and their quiet life together near the country store. Yet even amid creativity, darkness loomed. Their private life spiraled. One night, Pamela claimed Morrison tried to kill her in a jealous rage. Whether true or not, it revealed an unsettling truth. In Laurel Canyon, even love came with danger. Jim Morrison's time in the canyon was a microcosm of the era itself. Wild, beautiful, volatile. His music soared, but his demons haunted him. And in the end, Laurel Canyon wasn't just a sanctuary for artists. It was a place where some came to find themselves, and others to lose themselves. Zappa's Wild Canyon Circus. Let's take a moment to talk about someone whose stay in Laurel Canyon was short, but unforgettable. Frank Zappa. If you know anything about Zappa, you know he didn't fit any mold. While most musicians chased fame or soaked up the California sun, Zappa stayed inside, composing, recording, experimenting. While others were partying, he was creating nonstop. When Zappa and the Mothers of Invention moved into a Laurel Canyon home, it became more than just a house. It became a creative vortex, a magnet that pulled in artists from all corners of the music world. Zappa wasn't just working, he was conducting a never-ending symphony of sound and chaos. Pauline Butcher, his secretary, described it best. To her, Zappa was a full-blown workaholic, a genius who saw the world in time signatures and musical phrases. While others slept, he wrote, and as he worked, legends passed through his door like it was a revolving stage. One night, you might see Mick Jagger chatting with Captain Beefheart, Joni Mitchell softly strumming in the corner, Eric Clapton and David Gilmour trading licks, Mama Cass always ready with a joke, Stephen Stills, David Crosby, Jeff Beck, Marianne Faithfull, Rod Stewart, they all came and went. This wasn't just a scene, it was music history in real time. And Zappa? He wasn't starstruck, he was steering it. One of the best canyon stories comes from Alice Cooper. Back then, Cooper's band had a talent for clearing out rooms. Loud, wild, confusing. But Zappa saw something the crowd didn't. He said, anyone who can clear a room that fast, I've got to sign. And he did. That's what made Zappa different. He didn't care about radio hits or polished looks. He wanted authenticity, rawness, ideas that bent the rules or broke them entirely. Laurel Canyon was known for harmony and sunshine, but Zappa brought the storm, and in it, he made lightning. Naked swims, sand-filled rooms, and the jam sessions that shaped a generation. The magic of Laurel Canyon wasn't limited to those who lived there full-time. It was also a magnet for legends just passing through. Some came for a weekend. Others dropped by for a midnight jam. But in those fleeting visits, musical history was made. One night in 1968 perfectly captures that magic. Peter Tork of the Monkees hosted a jam session in his hilltop home just above the canyon. Among the guests, George Harrison and Ringo Starr of the Beatles, and Stephen Stills, already turning heads in Buffalo Springfield. According to Tork, it was fabulous. What stuck with him most wasn't the celebrity lineup, it was Ringo's drumming. Solid, effortless, perfect. There was no showmanship, just rhythm, just feel. The same steady beat that powered the greatest band in the world, playing in a cozy living room in Laurel Canyon. Tork's home also hosted Jimi Hendrix, who often stopped by with drummer Buddy Miles. They'd hang out, jam, and swim in the pool, often nude, not scandalous. Just Laurel Canyon. A place where everything was spontaneous, free, and gloriously unfiltered. And the weirdness didn't stop there. Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys wasn't technically a Canyon resident, but his spirit fit right in. Known for his eccentric genius, Wilson once filled his entire living room with sand. Why? To feel like he was at the beach while composing. Michelle Phillips of the Mamas and the Papas walked in on that surreal scene. And instead of calling it crazy, she called it brilliant. Because Wilson was writing some of his finest work. That was Laurel Canyon. It wasn't about climbing charts. It was about chasing inspiration wherever it led. Even if that meant building a sandbox indoors, diving into a pool with Jimmy, or trading chords with the Beatle by the fireplace. Laurel Canyon didn't follow rules. It followed vibes. And the result was music that wasn't just heard, it was felt for generations to come. Thank you for watching. To continue with more content, comment 1 to let us know you're still following. Joni, Crosby, and the Sound of a Culture in Flux. 1966 wasn't just another year, it was a turning point. You could feel it in the air. You could hear it in the music. The bright innocence of early 60s pop was fading fast, replaced by a sound that was deeper, more honest, and more urgent. One cultural commentator nailed it when he said, "Just listen to the shift when you go from the Beach Boys to Buffalo Springfield. In the same year, that's not evolution, that's a cultural earthquake." Songs like California Girls still celebrated beaches and sunshine, but just down the hill, Buffalo Springfield was recording For What It's Worth, a haunting protest anthem echoing unrest and change. It was a national moment, and Laurel Canyon was right at its center. Enter Joni Mitchell. David Crosby first saw her in a tiny Florida coffee house. She wasn't famous yet, but the moment she opened her mouth, Crosby said he was gobsmacked. Her voice, her lyrics, her presence. He knew he was watching something rare and extraordinary. He brought her back to Laurel Canyon not just because he admired her art, but because he believed in it. And yes, he fell for her too. Later he said, "I fell for her, and she wrote some of the greatest songs ever written." Joni didn't just join the scene, she transformed it. Her arrival marked a new chapter. She wasn't interested in superficial sweetness. Her songs were raw, poetic, vulnerable. The magic of Laurel Canyon played out in moments like the one screenwriter Carl Gottlieb remembered. A barbecue at Cass Elliott's house with Eric Clapton, Joni Mitchell, and others. Clapton wasn't talking, he was staring. Staring at Joni's fingers, trying to figure out how she made her guitar sound like that. That's what made the Canyon different. Ego bowed to curiosity. Greatness inspired awe, not arrogance. But even here in the Garden of Musical Eden, hearts broke. When Joni discovered Crosby had cheated, she didn't yell. She wrote. And then she performed that new song in front of Crosby at a party. Can you imagine that? A room full of stunned silence. Joni pouring out truth. Crosby speechless. Because in Laurel Canyon, music wasn't a performance. It was a confession, a reckoning, and sometimes a revenge. And Joni Mitchell? She was the high priestess of emotional truth, and she never missed a note. Our House, Her Songs, and the Birth of a Laurel Canyon Legend. Joni Mitchell's arrival in Laurel Canyon wasn't just a new address. It was a seismic event in the world of music. Her presence lit a creative fire that spread through the hills, inspiring not only her own unforgettable work, but igniting sparks in those around her. One of the most iconic results? Her 1970 album, Ladies of the Canyon. A love letter to the neighborhood itself. The songs were soaked in the spirit of Laurel Canyon, its light, its scent, its soul. Joni later described it with poetic precision. My dining room looked out over Frank Zappa's duck pond. Up in the hills, Buffalo Springfield were playing. It smelled like eucalyptus. Laurel Canyon had a wonderful, distinctive smell. It wasn't just scenery, it was sensory. It was magic. And into that magic walked Graham Nash, fresh from the British invasion with the Hollies, but feeling creatively stifled. Then came Mama Cass, the ever-warm, ever-welcoming heart of the canyon, who introduced him to Joni Mitchell at one of her famous gatherings. The moment Nash saw Joni, he called it a seduction scene extraordinaire. Their connection was instant, romantic, artistic, electric. Before long, Nash had moved in with Joni. Their home became more than a shared living space. It was a creative sanctuary, a place where lyrics flowed as easily as morning coffee. The canyon had a way of doing that. It brought people in, made them feel safe, and then cracked them open creatively. And then, the moment that changed music history. At another one of Mama Cass's legendary get-togethers, David Crosby, Stephen Stills, and Graham Nash picked up their guitars and started singing together. 3 voices, one perfect harmony. Nash described it simply. Whatever that sound is, it was born in 3 seconds. It wasn't rehearsed, it wasn't planned, it was destiny echoing through the rafters of Cass's living room. Soon after, Neil Young joined them, and Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young was born. A band that would become a cornerstone of American music. And where did they rehearse, write, and find inspiration? In the canyon. In those tucked-away hillside homes that felt more like temples of creativity than anything else. Nash's own house, where he lived with Joni, became a kind of creative nucleus, and it was there that he wrote one of the band's most cherished songs, Our House. A tender ballad inspired by a simple, quiet day with Joni. 2 artists, a vase of fresh flowers, and a piano. That's all it took. That's all it needed. The canyon wasn't just a backdrop, it was the co-writer of so many legendary songs, and that connection was never more clear than when CSNY played their first major show at the Auditorium Theater in Chicago, with Joni Mitchell opening the night. It was a full circle moment. The canyon's children now on stage singing to the world. Their next stop? Woodstock. That performance, etched into the very fabric of American culture, was more than just a concert. It was a declaration. A sound born in the trees and decks of Laurel Canyon was now the soundtrack of a generation. The end of the dream. 1969. The year everything changed. For nearly a decade, Laurel Canyon had been a haven, a sun-drenched retreat where music was made with open doors and neighbors wandered barefoot from house to house. But that summer, the dream began to curdle. The first tremors were subtle. Rumors. Odd stories. A weird visitor here, a strange vibe there. Then came a knock at Arthur Lee's door. It was Bobby Beausoleil, a fellow musician with a disturbing tale. He spoke of a man named Charles Manson and a family he was part of. Just weeks later, the Manson family murders would shake the world. 5 people were slaughtered in a nearby home, including actress Sharon Tate, 8 months pregnant. Beausoleil and his girlfriend were also swept into that blood-stained spiral. The horror wasn't far away. It was right next door. The impact was immediate. Laurel Canyon's sense of freedom vanished. Doors that once welcomed friends were locked. Curtains stayed drawn. The canyon that had once pulsed with music and trust now echoed with fear. And then came Altamont. Meant to be the West Coast's Woodstock, the Altamont Free concert ended in chaos. The Hells Angels, hired as security, turned the dream into a nightmare. 4 people died. The Grateful Dead refused to take the stage. Whatever innocence remained, Altamont buried it. As the 1970s dawned, Laurel Canyon changed. The original dreamers, the folk singers, the poets, the barefoot prophets, looked around and saw a different place. A new crowd had arrived. Locals called them skippies. Younger, louder, rougher. The vibe felt less like community, more like a clash. Complaints grew about crime, noise, tension. The once seamless blend of art and neighborly trust began to splinter. The music didn't stop, but it changed. It grew darker, more introspective. Gone were the golden harmonies of unity. In their place were songs of betrayal, fear, and a world growing colder. Laurel Canyon had opened its arms to the world, but by the end of the decade, it slowly began to close them. The golden age was over, but its soul? That still lingers. In every echo of a harmony, in every whispered melody, in every story sung long after the last fire on Lookout Mountain burned out. Do you think the Laurel Canyon scene could ever happen again in today's world? Or was it a once-in-a-lifetime moment in history? Laurel Canyon's second wave, from laundry rooms to legends. As the 1960s faded into memory and many of its original icons moved on, trading humble canyon cottages for hilltop mansions and world tours, Laurel Canyon didn't fall silent. Instead, a new generation stepped in, ready to pick up the torch and keep the music alive. One of the most influential voices of this second wave was Jackson Browne. His Laurel Canyon journey didn't start in the spotlight. It started in a laundry room. That's right. He was living in the makeshift guest space of a Columbia Records executive's home, guitar in hand, songs in his head. But that tiny room would prove to be the first step toward an extraordinary career. Browne went on to write some of the most deeply felt songs of the era, like These Days and Running on Empty. He even co-wrote Take It Easy, yes, that Take It Easy, with his canyon neighbor Glenn Frey of the Eagles. Reflecting on the era, Browne called it an amazing tribal life. And that phrase says it all. The canyon still buzzed with a sense of community, of shared purpose, of musicians building each other up. Glenn Frey himself arrived in Laurel Canyon almost by accident. He once told the story of running into David Crosby at the country store, that ever-important meeting place. And from there, the path was set. Frey and Don Henley shared a small house on Ridpath Drive. Back then, they weren't megastars yet. They were backing singers for Linda Ronstadt, learning the ropes, refining their sound. But those jam sessions and songwriting nights, they turned into something bigger. Soon, Frey and Henley teamed up with Randy Meisner and Bernie Ledon, and the Eagles were born. Their polished, country-tinged rock would go on to define an entire era, and it all started in Laurel Canyon. Meanwhile, Linda Ronstadt, already a star in her own right, was becoming one of the canyon's guiding lights. Whether performing solo or with the Stone Ponies, she was a regular at the Troubadour, the local venue that served as both a proving ground and a creative crucible. Her partnership with songwriter J.D. Souther, another Canyon resident, produced some of her biggest hits and further cemented the neighborhood's reputation as the heart of musical collaboration. And then there was Bonnie Raitt, recording her debut album while living in the canyon. Her blend of blues, folk, and rock brought a new texture to the Laurel Canyon sound. Just down the road, James Taylor was crafting his breakout record Sweet Baby James, a project that would help define the early 70s singer-songwriter movement. But Taylor wasn't working in isolation. He was also encouraging a friend, someone with immense talent but a quiet confidence. Carole King. Taylor pushed King to step into the spotlight as a performer, not just as a songwriter. The result? One of the greatest albums of all time, Tapestry. Recorded in Laurel Canyon, the album became an anthem of emotional honesty and quiet strength. And that iconic cover photo of King sitting barefoot in her canyon home with her cat and a quilt isn't just a publicity shot. It's a snapshot of a moment, of a woman and a place that helped shape her. That's what Laurel Canyon was. It wasn't just a location, it was a mindset, a movement, a muse. Even as the 70s marched forward, even as the industry grew more commercial and the artists became global superstars, that little canyon carved into the hills above Los Angeles remained a sanctuary. A place where songs were born from conversation, from heartbreak, from hope. A place where music still mattered, and always would. What remains of Laurel Canyon's spirit? Today, if you take a drive through Laurel Canyon, you'll see a very different place than the one that gave birth to a musical revolution. The ramshackle cottages where artists once shared songs and stories have been replaced by multi-million-dollar homes. Gated properties now line the narrow streets that once welcomed barefoot songwriters, and late-night jam sessions. And it begs the question, could Laurel Canyon have held on to its creative soul if the drugs and the fame hadn't gotten in the way? Or was its transformation inevitable, a victim of its own success? The truth, as always, lies somewhere in between. The very thing that made Laurel Canyon so special, its ability to foster raw, unfiltered creativity, also made it irresistible to the larger forces of commerce and culture. The moment those iconic songs began topping charts, the neighborhood changed. Rents skyrocketed. Privacy became precious. And suddenly, struggling musicians could no longer afford to live in the place that had once embraced them. The carefree, communal spirit that defined the early years gave way to something more polished, more guarded. Fame brought fortune, but also pressure. And with that pressure came distance. The decks where neighbors once swapped songs became studios with locked doors. And then there was the other side, the shadow that grew alongside the spotlight. Drugs. The counterculture of the late 60s wasn't just about peace and love. It also carried with it a destructive undercurrent. Substance abuse slowly chipped away at the very thing that had made the community so vibrant. Connection. Relationships frayed. Creative collaborations dissolved. Dreams that once thrived in the canyon's open air became dulled, tangled, and in some cases lost. It's hard not to wonder, if the culture of excess hadn't taken hold, would Laurel Canyon still be that artistic sanctuary today? Maybe, maybe not. But here's what we do know. While the magic of those years may no longer fill the air, the legacy still echoes. You can hear it in the harmonies of today's folk pop, in the raw honesty of the modern singer-songwriter, in the idea that music is best made together, not alone. Laurel Canyon wasn't just a neighborhood, it was a movement. A moment in time when the right people, the right place, and the right spirit came together and created something unforgettable. And while the streets may look different now, the soul of Laurel Canyon lives on, in the music, in the memories, and in the stories we still tell. Did Laurel Canyon's magic truly fade? Or did it just move on? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. If this story struck a chord, explore more moments like this in our channel's history series. And don't forget to subscribe and share Past Not Past with someone who remembers when music really meant something. Thanks for watching.